From the trucker strike we just talked about to corruption scandals and changes in presidential leadership, the Brazilian real has been on quite a ride, as we can see from this chart we're going to put out. This is the real over the last 5 years. It started off with some protests against corruption over the white line, and then we ended up with Brazil credit being downgraded, and then there was always also the big scandal that led to Rousseff being impeached, Temer coming in. That's the yellow line. Then you can see actually the real strengthening against the dollar, and then over in the purple, the former President Lula went to prison, and then orange was that trucker strike we've just been talking about. Joining us now on the telephone is Lee Alstong, Indiana University Professor of Economics. Great to have you here, Mr. Professor. So give us a sense, how much of this is politics and how much of it's economics? How much of it is fiscal and monetary problems, and how much is just corruption?
Well, that's a real question. My take on it is that it's more due to political uncertainty right now. That's putting a little bit of a check on foreign direct investment, which until recently had been quite high. And as you noted, the real had been doing pretty well the last couple of years, along with foreign direct investment. Monetary policy has been, I'd say, outstanding. The real problem is on the fiscal side, that Temer has been trying to push through pension reform, which Brazil really needs. But that's not, I don't see that going anywhere until after the election. But the two sort of things holding back investment, foreign direct investment in particular, would be the lack of pension reform and the so-called Brazilian tax, which has a lot to do with the high cost of labor regulations.
Well, as we've seen, even for the trucker strike, when you try to do things that hurt people in the pocketbook, they don't like it very much. Is there anybody on the scene who would have the political wherewithal to actually get some of those relatively unpopular things done that need to be done? I mean, Mr. Temer, after all, was in some ways almost an accidental president.
Yeah, he was accidental, which to some extent gave him his advantage. I would say from the get-go, he was a lame duck, which gave him a lot more freedom, I think, to pursue policies. Unfortunately, right now, we don't see anybody with a clear agenda that, except for Lula, and he's not. I don't think that's going to happen. And then on the right, Bolsonaro, his rejection rate is really quite high. So I'm bullish about Brazil in the long run, but pessimistic in the short run.
Well, also joining us from Sao Paulo is Mauricio Oreng, Rabobank senior Brazil strategist, and Rabobank basically provides loans to the agricultural sector. So pivoting from the short-term issues, how much trouble is the sugar mill industry and the soybean industry in Brazil right now?
Well, basically, I don't cover the agricultural sectors in Brazil, but just as an overview, I think this political uncertainty will have limited impact on overall the agricultural sector. And basically, we have to monitor the developments, what is going to happen with the exchange rate, which could, of course, have very different outcomes depending on the political results after the elections. So basically, this could influence the sector, but overall, on a structural base, the sector is very strong.
So then in a broader business sense, when you wind up taking the story of Petrobras as an example of a company trying to appeal to international investors, trying to get on the right foot, but then not being able to make the changes it needs to make, and then the government, in essence, taking control of policy, what does that say to a business leader in Brazil or an outside investor?
Actually, basically, the idea is that the next president will have to allow Petrobras to, practice like a pro-market policy, pricing policy. And I think of course, I'm not the specialist in the oil sector to discuss the specific issues, but from a macroeconomic standpoint, the most important factor is that Petrobras is allowed to, has freedom to set prices so that Petrobras will continue to invest in the oil sector, which is pretty important for the Brazilian economy in the long term. And I think, as Petrobras practice this pricing policy, we don't have spillovers, negative spillovers into the fiscal side, where we already have huge problems to solve.
So Mauricio, in a nutshell, if I'm an investor and I'm thinking about Brazil, what's your pitch to me that I should invest in Brazil?
Well, Brazil has many opportunities, notably in the agricultural sector, where Rabobank has a good presence. But there are big opportunities, for instance, in infrastructure. We have a very underdeveloped infrastructure here in Brazil, so that could create even spillovers, positive spillovers into other investments. I would say that agriculture, infrastructure are some of the top sectors where the opportunities are. But basically, Brazil needs to solve macroeconomic problems, especially on the fiscal side. And it's key to deliver the social security reform, so we'll have a solution to the debt sustainability problem, and that will improve the outlook for other sectors as well.